What's up, everybody? Welcome back. And we're here with some more NFL DFS picks and lineup advice for DraftKings and FanDuel, this time for the Thursday night single game showdown slate, week 7, Denver Broncos and the New Orleans Saints. And we have a beauty for this Thursday night game. Welcome. I'm Brian Jester, co-founder here at Occupy Fantasy Single Game $1 Million Winner. And in this video, we will discuss the injuries, all of them, that impact tonight's very unusual showdown slate. We will analyze low-risk lineup construction tips, and we will discuss picks, strategies, ideas for the biggest contest that DraftKings and FanDuel have to offer for tonight. Now, if you played NFL preseason DFS with us, you will love this slate. A lot of these names will be extremely familiar. Both teams are banged up, and pricing has become almost a non-issue to where it's almost a pick'em slate. So that makes it extremely fun, but also extremely challenging. I will try to navigate all of this for you here in this video. So let's get started. And let's start with the Denver side since they are the visiting team. And we'll talk about the injuries that impact Denver. First and foremost, and he's not in the player pool because he is a defensive player, but maybe number one, at least top 3 cornerback in the league, Pat Surtain, is out with a concussion. So that is a big downgrade to Denver's pass defense, big upgrade to the New Orleans wide receivers, the ones that will actually play tonight. We'll get to that in a second. They could get back Damari Mathis, who was on injured reserve. He's a corner. That could help soften the blow a little bit, but no one can replace Pat Surtain. So big bump to New Orleans pass catchers and the passing game in general because of that. Now, Denver has a couple of guys on injured reserve that they could activate that could bump some of their projections. So Damari Mathis, the corner, Mike McGlinchey, their offensive tackle, that could be a big bump for them, and as well as their edge, Baron Browning, who can put pressure on the quarterback. So let's monitor their 4 p.m. elevations and injured reserve activations today. Again, it won't impact the player pool, but maybe some bumps or downgrades in our projections. Now, Josh Reynolds remains out for the Broncos. He's on injured reserve with that hand injury. Let's take a look at how the receiver routes shook out last week with Reynolds out of the lineup. Obviously, Courtland Sutton led the way with 38 routes. He is their alpha number 1 wide receiver. And then coming in at number 2 was a tie between rookie Troy Franklin, who a lot of us were excited about in best ball and drafted him pretty frequently, especially early on in the offseason. He is just $3,000 on DraftKings, ran 30 routes last week. And then Devon Vele, who Moose and I have been clamoring for on the Saturday shows ever since week 1. He was active again last week, took the slot role over Lil Jordan Humphrey, and he also ran 30 routes. Marvin Mims, their early draft pick from last year, he ran 16 routes, got a couple deep shots. Marvin Mims is $1,200 on DraftKings. And Lil Jordan Humphrey, who had manned the slot role for most of the season while Vele has been a healthy scratch, he only ran 11 routes last week. He is just $2,000 on DraftKings. So all these guys, super cheap, is the theme of the slate. Greg Dulcich, not an injury. He's a healthy scratch as he was last week. And with Dulcich being out, it was Lucas Kroll, absolute preseason legend from a couple of years ago. We played him in preseason some this year as well. Lucas Kroll ran 30 routes as well. And guess what? He's $1,000. Starting tight end, $1,000. An actual talented pass catcher. And then the backups, Adam Troutman and Nate Atkins, ran 6 routes each. So no new injuries on the offensive side of the ball for Denver, but just a recap of what has happened the past couple of weeks and how it impacts this particular showdown slate. Now, on the New Orleans side, here's where the actual injuries come into play on the offensive side. Derek Carr, doubtful with that oblique injury. He is probably more than likely 99% going to be out. Spencer Rattler will start for him. Looked better than I think most people anticipated last week. Threw for 240 yards, ran for some. Didn't look completely overwhelmed, so he will start tonight for the Saints. Both of their top wideouts are out. Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed. Olave with the concussion, Shaheed with the meniscus trim. If you have him in season long or in best ball, pray that it is just a trim and not a full repair. If it's a trim, he can be back in weeks. If it's a repair, he is out for the rest of the year. So fingers crossed on that. But for tonight, they're both out. So what does that mean? Here's how the routes shook out last week. So Shaheed didn't get hurt until late in that game. He led the team with 44 routes. Then it was Bub Means, who we didn't get to play that much in preseason DFS, but led the team in targets with 8, scored a touchdown. And he also ran 37 routes. He will be the wide receiver 1 tonight for New Orleans at 4K. Pretty nuts. And he'll be extremely popular, like 50% owned on DraftKings. Not nearly as high on FanDuel because his pricing is a little different. Let's look at FanDuel really quickly. He's $8,500, more reasonably priced. Still underpriced, but not as egregiously priced as DraftKings. He is $8,500 here on FanDuel. After that was the veteran Cedric Wilson, been around the league. He ran 28 routes. And then Mason Tipton, who we highlighted a couple of showdown slate to go versus the Chiefs. Got some air yards. A lot of the people in our Discord were upset, or at least making mental notes at the air yards that Tipton was getting in that game. He'll be the wide receiver 2 or 3 tonight. He ran 24 routes last week. Should get some deep shots as well. I know Lobby was limited to just 2 routes. Got hurt really early in that game last week. So they'll probably call up 2 practice squad receivers. They only have 3 guys on the active roster that are healthy. It's Means, Wilson, and Tipton. Our guesses are Equanimous St. Brown, the veteran, and then Kevin Austin. Both these guys have been with the team since preseason, so with their tenure, they probably get the wide receiver at 4 and 5 shots. Monitor the elevation, see if we get any news from the reporters on if any of those guys will factor in to the game plan. Taysom Hill, he is still out. We saw last week with Juwan Johnson leading the way, not having to deal with any Taysom BS. Juwan ran 39 routes, and Juwan Johnson's relatively expensive on the slate, $6,800. And his backup, who is it? Foster Moreau ran 15 routes last week, and he is pretty cheap as well. Foster Moreau down here, $2,800. So on a typical slate, 15 routes, we're like, yeah, $2,800, sign me up, but we have everybody under price here. They could also get back their guard, Lucas Patrick. That would help the offense a little bit. They've been out tons of offensive linemen this year. At least getting one back could potentially help. Whew, deep breath. I think that's it for injuries. Crazy amount of injuries. We need the water sip early this time around. So many injuries to talk about. So you'll notice with all these injuries, salary is pretty much a joke. And this game may be a joke. Let's talk about low-risk contests, 50-50s, double-ups, head-to-heads, and let's see how we can build those. Now, as we talk about in the show, try to lock up all the scoring, both running backs, both starting quarterbacks. Javonte Williams has mostly handled the bulk of the work for Denver. Now, Jaleel McLaughlin still gets some work as well. But we can actually lock up the scoring with Kamara, with both quarterbacks, Bo Nix, Spencer Rattler. Let's put Kamara at MVP or captain to show you how this looks. And then we put in Javonte Williams. 24.50. Normally we would be like, that's not possible. However, we can play Bub Means. We could play Devon Vele. We could play Foster Moreau, Troy Franklin, Mason Tipton, Marvin Mims, Lucas Kroll. I think Kroll at 1K, 39, that almost gets you up to Bub Means. I think you really want to get the Bub Means and low risk if you possibly can. So what we could do here, we could swap Kamara for Bo Nix, or we could swap Rattler for Kamara. That's really what we have to do if we want to get in Bub Means if we play this core 4. The other way, and I think it'll be somewhat popular, is you play Bub Means at captain. Nothing wrong with playing a wide receiver 1 at captain. 8,300. We'll put Kamara. Now we can play Broncos defense, Vele, whoever it is. This might be the way to go. You can easily fit in these 4 guys, core actual NFL players, and then fill in 2 of the replacements, fill-ins that are cheaper than they should be to get a low-risk lineup on DraftKings. It is a tough 2v2 decision on what you're going to do with those final 2 spots, but it's easily possible, and it's up to you. Just check out the model. Check out the video. It's posted at the beginning of this video, but the showdown video I did a couple of weeks ago, how to use the builder and the model and the tools to build low-risk lineups. That'll be especially helpful for tonight's slate. Now, unfortunately, as you know, we can't do it on FanDuel, despite the mispricings. So Kamara, Nix, Rattler, Javonte, nope, $3,000. Unfortunately, there's not a $3,000 player on FanDuel, but let's see here. This is a tough decision. You have to leave out one of these 3, and it gets really tough. You don't want to leave out Kamara. He'll be the most popular player on the slate. Nix is the next most expensive. Rattler as an it's really tough. So let's just say you leave out one of Nix or Rattler, right? What does it look like? Then you could play Tipton at 85. Let's go down. Bub Means, 85. And then we could play. Then it gets kind of weird. The defenses will be more popular than the kickers on this slate. Let's see who else. We could scroll all the way down, and we could play someone like Vele at 7K, which is probably a little better. 10,500. Then we could play one of the kickers. You could sacrifice Nix for Rattler. You could not play Javonte Williams. Underperforming running back, by the way, according to ESPN's metrics and most expected fantasy points metrics. Normally those guys regress to the mean, but if he doesn't regress to the mean, you don't want to play Javonte Williams in a split backfield. You can play both quarterbacks. Let's see what that looks like if that's the way you want to go. Then you could play Vele. Let's go down. And then you could play McLaughlin. That's not a bad choice. You could play Foster Moreau, Tipton. Different ways to go about it. So basically what you want to do on FanDuel for low risk tonight, Kamara locked in, and then 2 of Nix, Rattler, or Javonte Williams, your choice. All right, let's go back to DraftKings, and let's talk about high-risk strategy. The most fun and most challenging part of tonight's slate are the biggest contests. And even the smaller GPPs are extremely challenging. Because you have to balance the fun of playing all these different guys at cheaper price tags without leaving too much salary, without making lineups that make sense, because it's not something that we normally do. Normally, we're building towards the salary ceiling, lower salary lineups don't make sense, but they do in this case. And I'll give you some tips on how to figure this out. So if you're playing larger contests or any high risk contests, you're going to naturally leave more salary than you normally do on this slate. There's only a limited number of lineups that can reach near the salary cap, near the 50K salary cap on DraftKings. Less so on FanDuel, but still a factor, near the 60K salary cap on FanDuel. So any lineup that is near that number is going to be pretty heavily duplicated, unless you're playing a super low-owned guy that no one's talking about. I mean, I'm talking about like Atkins, one of the 4th and 5th New Orleans receivers, Audric Estime, Troutman, like these types of guys. Sure, that's fine. But any of the other guys I've mentioned so far in this video, if you are near 50K on DK, near 60K on FanDuel, it will probably be pretty heavily duplicated. So leave more salary on the table. How do you figure out what is too much salary? Basically, what I would do is, the exercise I would do is appropriately price these guys. In your mind, just a rough estimate, ballpark of what these guys should be priced based on where these positions have been priced on previous showdown slates, and you can get a good idea of how much salary you can leave when that guy is in the lineup. So let's scroll down. I'll show you this exercise live on video here. So if we scroll down, Devon Vele, number 2 receiver basically for Denver. Where are number 2 receivers typically priced on DraftKings? They're anywhere from 5,500 all the way up to 7K, 8K. So Vele at 44, he is at least, what, $2,000? At least $1,000 underpriced, but probably $2,000 to $3,000 underpriced. So when Vele's in the lineup, without getting crazy, you could think that if I leave $1,000 to $3,000 on the table, that is perfectly normal for a Devon Vele lineup. Let's scroll down. Bub Means, number 1 wide receiver. Now, not a great number 1 wide receiver, but he still should be like 8K. That's 4K more than what he's currently priced on DraftKings. So any lineup that has 4K left over with Bub Means, that makes a lot of sense to me. Same with these other guys. Cedric Wilson, number 2 receiver. He should probably be 4,500, 5,500. Who else? Mason Tipton, wide receiver 3. Maybe he's appropriately priced, but if he's the wide receiver 2 and takes over Cedric Wilson, he should be 5,500. So he's 3K underpriced. Lucas Kroll, number 1 tight end tonight. Number 1 pass catching tight end. Let's just look at his game logs really quickly. Started last week, 30 routes, got 4 targets. If a tight end got 4 targets and he's the starter, ran 30 routes, he would at least be 5K. So he's 4K underpriced, like Bub Means is. So you see all this. Now, if you add these two together, you play multiple players in the lineup. You play Kroll in the lineup, you play Bub Means in the lineup, and you think to yourself, if I played a wide receiver 1 and a tight end 1, that could be near the salary cap on a normal slate. But if I play them together in this slate, I could leave 8K left over, and that would be normal because they can be the highest scorers at their position. So that's the way to think about it. Really, if you're leaving a lot of salary left over and you're using 0 quarterbacks, that could still work if you're playing a defense, or you're playing these 1% guys, 1% to 2% guys that aren't running full-time routes or aren't playing full-time. That's when it gets bad. But if you play these guys who are in true roles tonight, the guys who I've mentioned who are beneficiaries of the injuries, if you're playing those guys, you can leave 10,000 on the table, 15,000, maybe 20,000. We've seen if this game goes under the total and a defense is in there and the quarterbacks don't do well, we could see an insane number. We saw a slate last year. It was 12-9 final score, or maybe it was two years ago, and the winning salary was like literally $20,000 or $30,000. Had multiple defenses and kickers. Not saying that's going to happen tonight. It's not even likely, but it is possible. So just keep that in mind as you're building, especially for larger contests. Key takeaway: if you take away one thing from this video, take the salary for what a guy should be, subtract it from what they are, and that's the amount you can leave on the table at the least if that guy is in the lineup. So hopefully that helps. Again, the defenses will be popular. If you want just a very simple pivot, you're not thinking about salary and all this stuff, play the kickers instead of defenses. They will be a fraction of the ownership of the defenses. So that's one way, and probably rightfully so with these two very unserious offenses on the field tonight. Another way you can think about pivoting tonight is just pivot to a guy who is next in line on that team or the next man up. So an example is, right, Bub Means 50% owned on DraftKings. Wide receiver 1. If he is outperformed by his wide receiver 2, how often does that happen in an NFL game? Relatively often. Regularly, I would say. Then pivot from Bub Means to Mason Tipton or Cedric Wilson and play the same lineup that you would normally play with Bub Means. Easy pivot to do that. Same with Vele. You could play Lil Jordan Humphrey. We know Sean Payton absolutely can't get enough of Lil Jordan Humphrey. Maybe there's a 1-week blip of Vele last week and Lil Jordan Humphrey is back in the starting role this week. Swap him for Vele. Swap Franklin for Vele. Swap Lil Jordan Humphrey for Franklin. Marvin Mims with his deep shots, 100 air yards last week. Swap him with any of these guys. Swap down. If you don't want to get too crazy, you want to build a normal lineup, just swap one down, to the next player in ownership and salary, and that's a great way to get different, especially in smaller GPPs and maybe larger GPPs too, depending on how much salary is left. Popular captains on DraftKings shouldn't be any surprise tonight because people are going to rush to play the actual players with real salaries. So Alvin Kamara, we have near the top, a big jump off from Kamara. We have him like 35% captain on DraftKings in the largest GPP. Drop it down. Then people will play Bo Nix, Spencer Rattler, Javonte Williams, Cortland Sutton, the real actual NFL players at real positions. Then it's all the other wide receivers and running backs and tight ends I've talked about. Can those guys be the highest score in this game? Yes, absolutely. Vele, Bub Means, Lucas Kroll, Marvin Mims. Sounds crazy, but especially if it's a low-scoring game, any of those guys can be the optimal captain or MVP even, if you're crazy enough on FanDuel. So consider those guys in the larger GPPs and play around with lineups that have those guys that captain smaller GPPs that don't get as crazy with ownership and salary. They can be really good as well. Anything else here? Let's talk about FanDuel MVP, and then we'll get out of here. So Kamara approaching, if not exceeding, 50% MVP is in the largest GPP. He'll be over that in smaller GPPs. Bo Nix, 20 to 25%, and then anyone else. So I do think that because all those guys are higher owned on DraftKings, they're not as high owned on FanDuel because of the pricing, because of the only need to play 5 players. So guys like Bub Means, who is 50% on DraftKings, will be like 20-something% on FanDuel. Guys like Franklin, who's over that 20% mark, may not get there on FanDuel. So there are enough lower owned options and salary savings that you play popular guys like Kamara and Nix at MVP and be totally fine. We talk about this on like stud quarterback slates where there are enough low owned options to make this happen. Or if you're playing the larger GPPs, you want to fade Kamara and Nix. You don't think Kamara can get going on this terrible offense. You think Nix is not a great quarterback. That's totally fair. You could play those other guys. You could drop down to Javonte and Cortland Sutton, or you could drop down to the wide receiver 1s and 2s on the team for the Saints and the Broncos. All right, I think that does it. Yeah, I think that covers it all. So again, salary, price players as how they should be priced. That'll give you a good indicator of how much salary to leave over. Our daily plug will be out this afternoon. That'll really run through the slate notes, strategies for specific contest types. It'll go in depth, and it'll be a written version of what I talked about in this video. Our Occupy model, extremely important tonight, ranks every player FanDuel and DraftKings with the projected ownership. And the builder, again, go back and watch the video I did a couple of weeks ago, how to build showdown lineups using our tools. It will be invaluable tonight to figure out which lineups are good and bad and which lineups are pairing together, which combinations, which captains are popping the most. It is extremely important on a slate like tonight. A normal slate, you could probably figure it out yourself. Here on a slate like tonight, where it's really hard to wrap your mind around the salary, how much to leave, which players to play with which players, use the builder and the rules and follow the video I posted a couple of weeks ago. It'll be extremely helpful. That'll do it for this video. Make sure you're subscribed if you're not already. So close to 10K. Go ahead and subscribe. You'll get notified when we go live or upload these videos. It'll help us out as well. Give us a thumbs up. Easy way to support the channel. Any questions? I know you probably have some. Drop a comment below the video. I will monitor the channel throughout the day. And Discord, we've already had discussions this morning in Discord about the slate. Hop in there. Link is in the description below. So Brian for Occupy, thank you for listening. Good luck in tonight's wild and crazy Broncos and Saints showdown slate.